There's such a pervasive literalism in YouTube. It's in the larger culture, but you can see it so clearly in some of the debates and the discussions on YouTube. And I wanted to see if I can't talk about some of the problems of literalism, see if I can't celebrate a little bit of the metaphorical capacities that we have, and see if I can't drive toward hopefully an opening of a discussion of meaningfulness and some of the problems of asking about is life or is life not meaningful, and you're just going to come at it in a truthful, matter-of-fact way. Okay, I think the first thing to maybe say is that it seems as if it's a long history here that people degrade metaphor. They speak of it as flowery language, fake language, kind of, the language of people who are deluded. And then there's this objective language, true language, language which doesn't have to make any recourse to metaphor, which just deals with the facts. And, that is really a problem. I think that's not only oversimplifying, but it's really missing the degree to which ideas are metaphors. I mean, metaphor is the very substance of thought. Thought is a kind of equating of the unequal in many different levels. You're equating the unequal. It's partly how you're able to learn from experience, even though past experience is never exactly the same as present or future experience. But that ability to say that something that happened previously is enough similar to some future event to warrant learning from the past event, right? This is to say that something is something else. This is a metaphor, but that's sort of what thought is. I don't think people are going to be able to get rid of metaphor as maybe as quickly as they thought. But one of the ways to get at this was Conference Report had posted a really interesting video where he was talking about the notion of God as a regulative ideal, and he was saying, the notion of God as a regulative ideal is wonderful. It may be that the world is better for the notion or the concept of God as ultimate, I guess, justice, or an idea of a regulative order, or conditions for possibilities of meaningfulness. I mean, there's different ways to come at it, but you don't necessarily have to have some objective fact of the matter there behind it in order to have that idea be useful. And he sort of says, imagine two worlds. There's one world where people are completely naturalist. They have no concepts of the divine order. They have no concepts of ultimate justice, no concepts of ultimate love and compassion, this kind of stuff. And then there's another world where people do have those kinds of concepts of the divine. Now, in neither world do they actually believe in the referent to those. It's not like they believe that there is some fact of the matter behind it. But he says if you think of the one world that just has the idea without the referent to it, it still seems like it potentially is a better world for that fact. And I wanted to talk more about that. I think that it's provocative. It cuts in the right direction because it cuts so directly against the kind of literalism that I do think is highly problematic. One of the books that I've been looking at lately, which I really can't recommend enough, a great book called The Liar's Tale, A History of Falsehood, and that's by Jeremy Campbell. And wonderful history of the wide-ranging, I guess, notions of what we mean by falsehood, and how it includes everything from metaphor and drama and outright lies, but it also has to do with camouflage and forms of deception. And one of the things that's really interesting is that he does a lot of work in situating Darwin as one of the great unmaskers and the great critiquers of the notion of truth that that now we stand in the modern period, sort of in the wake of Darwinian distrust of the notion of truth. That the notion of truth was deeply aligned to Platonic notions of eternal forms, and those became aligned with the church. And Darwin comes along, and in Darwin's worldview, Campbell says it's really closely aligned to Machiavelli. I mean, it's sort of interesting parallels of Machiavelli to Darwin, but that power supersedes truth, that power and survival value and the ability to deceive and deal with semblances and appearance, and that so much of animal communication doesn't deal with truth. It deals with exertions of power and appearance for the sake of outcome and consequence, not some, quotes, fact of the matter. And the more that you start to look at Darwin's work, you see it as being, again, not only this great distrust of truth, but a kind of distrust of a simple mapping between mind and a thing called reality. I mean, biodiversity being what it is, the range of kinds of species, you start to think about truth and falsehood in very different ways when you think about different ways that organisms navigate their way in particular environments. And truthfulness doesn't seem nearly as important as what does it mean for an organism and an environment to some way to thrive, to flourish, to maximize its potential in those regards. Okay, so in that context, I think it's really interesting to then go back to this question of, what are ideas as regulative ideals, whether or not there is a referent for those. So it could be something like God, that's what the conference report was talking about, but take something like love or justice. Now, somebody might say love, it's a delusion, it's reproduction, it's survival value, it's the instincts of a rabbit sort of glued on and romanticized onto the human. But somebody else might say, well, no, there is something more to love, that it may be when you're young, you fall in love with the idea of love, and then you run around and find someone to project that onto and try to make that work. But it could be you eventually see the bankruptcy of that. It could be that you learn that love means other things, and all those times along, it's not that you're in the question of is there or is there not really such a thing as love, so much as learning how to use that concept, grow that concept in order for your own growth and development, your own navigating your life, right? Overdrawn expectations can really be a problem, but it can be a problem to just give up at all and say, well, the overdrawn expectations were the problem, rather than just recalibrating and saying, well, what could it look like in light of other realities, or in light of humbler expectations. Think of the notion of justice. Okay, someone might make the claim, well, there really is no such thing as ultimate justice. There just isn't. The world is filled with countless injustices, and that's the fact of the matter. Yeah, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have some notion of justice. I think we can still have a notion of justice, have an ideal, have some concept of ultimate justice, and try to strive toward it, even if we can't ultimately achieve it, but to still retain it as a kind of value. Look at the way that mathematics has dealt with some of this. Okay, let's go to the issue of infinity, zero, and parallel lines. Okay, is there really some referent to zero? Now, some people are going to say, well, no, there is no such thing as zero. There is no nothingness. It's an invention. It's an idea. Well, you say, okay, well, what does that idea refer to? Well, zero, we say, well, it's the empty set. We could do this kind of stuff, but it seems as if you don't need a referent in order for us to build the world as we have, with the usefulness of that concept. We have a national debt. We have all kinds of ways that people use zero in calculations to build buildings, to construct infrastructure. There are ways that this idea has been useful, whether or not there really is such a thing. Take infinity, right? Is there some notion of infinity? I don't know. We have a concept. Is there really infinity? Now, some people are going to say no, there really is no such thing as infinity. Other people are going to say, well, there's orders of infinity. There's different kinds of infinity. What do you mean by infinity? You don't have to have some ultimate referent there, quotes, in the real world for infinity to be useful to help construct the world as people are able to live in it, right? It's the world that includes us. right? See, that's part of the problem of the concern over, is the referent really there or not? The world that you will deal with is never the world that's independent of people and their concepts. Now, we can try to think about a world that's independent of us, but that's still us thinking about that. I mean, the world that we always deal with is the world that includes us and our concepts and what we do with them. That's the thing to keep the eye on, not is there some referent to them ultimately, right? Parallel lines, are there really parallel lines? Well, there don't seem to be. It depends, on some kinds of eidetic space in some sort of mathematical planes. We can say there are parallel lines. There are other cases. We look around the empirical world and we say, look, there just aren't parallel lines anywhere to be found. We can see close approximations, sort of like a circle, very, very close approximations, but not true, pure, 100%, absolute ideal circle. But we still have those concepts. I mean, we never really deal, again, with the world except the world as it's conceptualized, and those concepts, they're metaphors. There's metaphors. I mean, I think part of this is the problem of the literalism that comes from trying to assume the posture of a detached observer. It's like people think they're gonna stand around in the world and then just look at what's there independent of them and try to watch what it does, and then try to talk about, again, what its regularities are, what it is, and it's an attempt to observe it. But when you get to us and trying to understand, humanity, it seems so different. It seems so different. There's a great line by Walker Percy. He says, the collision of two galaxies and the salivation of Pavlov's dogs, as dissimilar as they are far more alike than either is like the simplest act of naming. Yeah, speech somehow, it is an act that doesn't go on without us. See, it's that part of the world which you can't just observe because you're partly speaking, and again, it's that part of the world where the line between what's going on and what I'm doing gets a very funny line to draw. I mean, there is a sense in which when others watch me, the world seems to just be going on and my speech can be part of what's going on. But in my world, my speech doesn't go on without me. My speech is a vital part of the world as I live through it. And I think that existential difficulty of thought and speech, of our perceptions of the world being part of the world that we live in, it's like a responsibility that we don't want to accept. I think we like the literalism of the detached fact of the matter that can be described independent of us, because as soon as we start to deal with that sticky, messy world that always already includes us and includes our concepts and our words for things, it includes the kinds of responsibility for making meaning. See, I think many people don't want to be responsible for being partly the condition of life's meaningfulness. We want to say, look, either life is meaningful in some objective sense of the matter, or there is no meaning. Well, again, to me, those are way too literal. I think there is a sense in which we are, we're the way that life finds meaningfulness through a generating meaning organism. I mean, we're organisms of meaning who have been fated with the responsibility of being partly the condition of life's meaningfulness. It's not like it has meaningfulness out there independent of us, but it's not that it's just bereft of meaning. It's we are partly the responsibility, we're partly the condition of life's meaningfulness, and I think many people don't want to bear that responsibility. And I'll just end with, there are some people who, and you can just think about this philosophy. This is on the religious side as well as on the atheistic side. I mean, I think on both sides, the dogma. It's like there are people who are so committed to their dogma, they are so committed to their philosophies being true, to them literally being true, that they're ready to sabotage their lives. They're ready to ruin their lives and bring unnecessary hardship, unnecessary suffering, unnecessary meaninglessness and strife to prove that their philosophy is true. Whereas I think a better strategy is to try to figure out what is it about the human condition, about the kind of responsibility and ownership of meaning in language that would allow you to construct a philosophy such that the only way to prove that your philosophy is true would be to maximize your ability to flourish and to thrive and to live a really meaningful life.